Man is nothing else but what he makes of himself. Jean-Paul Sartre. You became what she wanted, slowly, without even knowing it. You started as a man, undomesticated, unknowable, alive, and you ended up a version of yourself that fit her comfort. You looked into her eyes and abandoned your own. You never read Being and Nothingness, but it has shaped your life more than any book you've ever read. Jean-Paul Sartre, in a Paris lit by war and rebellion, wrote a sentence that should have been handed to every man at birth. Hell is other people. Not because people are evil, but because in their gaze we lose ourselves. That is not love. That is bad faith, Sartre's great enemy. The moment when you stop being the author of your existence and become a character in someone else's novel. And it doesn't matter whether you're 20 and chasing her texts or 50 and wondering why your marriage feels like a quiet extinction. The shape of the prison is the same. You became for her instead of being for yourself. Now hear this. The man who lives for her dies by her indifference. This is not bitterness. This is not anger. This is metaphysics. You see, Sartre understood that consciousness is a void, a nothingness. It has no essence until it chooses. The man who forgets this, the man who thinks a woman will complete him, define him, redeem him, hands over the steering wheel of his own soul, and she feels it. Whether she is 19 and still ruled by her instinct, or 45 and emotionally intelligent, she knows when you have placed her on the throne of your identity. She knows when your need for her has become louder than your need to remain true to yourself, and that is when she pulls away. Not because she is cruel, not because she doesn't care, but because desire cannot survive in captivity. It needs space, it needs risk, it needs freedom, yours. The young man doesn't know this yet. He still thinks his love is a currency that buys loyalty. He has not yet felt the humiliation of offering everything and watching her eyes wander, but he will. And the older man? He knows. He knows too well. He sits in silence beside a woman who once wanted him, before he turned himself into a predictable echo, before he stopped challenging her reality, before he stopped being other and became his idea of safe. She doesn't want safe. She wants sovereign. This is Sartre's shocking truth. The human heart longs for what it cannot possess, and the man who does not need her, the man who can walk into her life and just as easily walk out, is the one who makes her confront her own abyss. That confrontation awakens her, not always gently, but deeply. You've seen it. The man who says less, who gives less, who holds his shape when she storm, he doesn't bend, he doesn't beg. And somehow, he is the one she cannot forget. Not because he played a game, but because he didn't break the rules of being. You want to be loved. That's human. But the moment you need to be loved to be someone, you vanish. This is not a trick. This is not a technique. This is existential integrity. The man who exists first, defines himself first, chooses his values first, and lets love orbit him if it dares. And if it doesn't, he is still whole. That is the man women fall for, the rare man, the Sartrean man, the one who remembers that the price of freedom is solitude and pays it gladly. You've been told to open up, to be vulnerable, to express your needs, to tell her how much she means to you, and yet, the more you opened, the more she closed. The more you shared, the more she withdrew. You thought your transparency would earn trust, but instead it diluted the mystery. You became readable, tame, harmless. Why? Because Sartre was right again. The human being is a project, not a product. You are not a fixed thing to be admired. You are an unfolding, a becoming. And when you reduce yourself to your emotions, your needs, your wounds, you confuse confession with presence, you turn your soul into a plea, you offer your depths before she's earned the map, and she cannot help but recoil, not because she's heartless, but because the masculine, in its highest form, is not a boy begging to be understood. It is a force that exists with or without witness. Sartre calls this the being for itself, the man who chooses, who defines himself, who stands in radical freedom, not recklessness, freedom, the terrifying kind, the kind that says, I will not be a product of your need. I will not collapse into the man you want me to be. I am. You want to know why that older man at the bar, weathered, calm, disinterested, can walk into a room and hold her gaze longer than any gym-sculpted boy? It's because he's already paid the price of identity. He's already lost the woman who left when he stopped chasing. He's already made the mistake of bending until his spine snapped. He's already tried to buy love with consistency. And now, he sits in silence, not as a performance, but as a monument to his own survival. He doesn't explain himself. He doesn't overgive. And that silence speaks louder than your cleverness ever will. Younger men mistake noise for power. Older men, if they've done the work, understand that the deepest gravity is wordless. She feels it. She doesn't know why, but in the presence of that man, the man who has no compulsion to impress, no anxiety to win, she feels something ancient stir, a dissonance, a pull, a recognition, not of safety, but of danger. Not physical danger, but ontological danger. The danger of facing a man who cannot be owned, who cannot be guilted, who cannot be reshaped by her insecurity. The danger of seeing someone who is already whole. And make no mistake, she will test that wholeness. She will provoke. She will withdraw. She will offer chaos dressed as passion, just to see if you lose your footing. And if you do, if you chase, if you explain, if you perform, you will collapse from man into mirror, from substance into shadow. But if you don't, if you remain unmoved, not because you're trying to win, but because you simply are, then she feels what Sartre called the anguish of freedom, your freedom. And in that anguish she will feel desire again, not because you manipulated her, not because you played the cold game, but because you reminded her of something every woman wants but cannot say, that the masculine is not supposed to bend toward approval, it is supposed to be the mountain that remains unmoved. Now hear this, and remember it when you're tempted to please, to fix, to explain. She doesn't want a man who needs her to breathe. She wants a man who breathes deeply in her absence. And if you become that man, not in theory, not in image, but in truth, she will feel your gravity. Whether she stays or not, whether she says it or not, she will remember you, because men like you are not common, and she knows it. There is a moment, subtle, invisible, when a man is about to disappear into her expectations. It's not loud, there is no warning bell, no alarm to save you. Just a moment where you say yes when your soul said no. When you soften a truth to keep her calm. When you withhold a boundary because you don't want her to leave. And in that moment, you betray the very essence of your being. Sartre named it clearly, mauvaise foi, bad faith. It's the moment a free man lies to himself to avoid the discomfort of freedom. You convince yourself it's love. That sacrifice is noble. That compromise is maturity. But you know, if you are honest, that it is not a conscious offering. It is a quiet extinction, a soft suicide. And you think she doesn't notice? She notices. She always notices. Even if she can't name it, she feels when you disappear from yourself. When your presence begins to orbit hers. When your truth becomes negotiable. When you start adjusting to avoid friction. And she grieves, not for you, but for the man you used to be. The man who met her as a mystery. The man who made her feel uncertain, alive, feminine, unstable in the best way. Now you are reliable. You are predictable. You are safe. And yet you sense it. The emptiness growing in her eyes. The touch that no longer lingers. The laughter that now feels like performance. And still you don't understand. You say, "But I've done everything right." Exactly. You've done everything right. And in doing so, you've become wrong in the one way that matters. You've ceased to be yourself. You've become a ghost of your former power. She didn't fall in love with your obedience. She fell in love with your distance, with your lack of need, with the untamed core you carried into the room before you decided that love meant taming yourself. And this is where the older man, if he is honest, finally admits something painful. He doesn't know who he is when she isn't looking. He's spent so many years being the provider, the protector, the dependable partner, that he's forgotten the boy who used to stare at the stars with fire in his chest. The boy who didn't need permission to speak, to leave, to be. That boy was closer to the truth than the man who replaced him. But this is not cause for despair. This is the doorway. Because unlike the myths you've been fed, manhood does not shrink with age. It sharpens, it clarifies, it burns cleaner. If, and only if, you stop lying to yourself. And the lie is simple, that her love is the prize. It is not. The prize is the man who remains whole in the presence of love, who does not fracture into versions, who does not trade identity for intimacy, who can love her fully without letting her define him, because once she senses you are no longer defined by her, she can finally relax into being with you. And yes, this defies everything you've been told. You were taught to serve, to please, to pursue. But Sartre saw through it all. He saw that to live authentically, you must remain a source of your own meaning, that you are condemned to be free, not cursed, but required to choose yourself every day, no matter who walks in or out of your life. And if she walks out, let her. If you are truly the rare man, the one who does not collapse into her absence, then you were never abandoned. You simply return to yourself, and she may come back, or she may not, but you will remain. And that is the only way forward. You have never been more attractive than in the moment you no longer needed to be. That is the paradox. And yet, almost no man believes it, because belief requires experience, and most men never give themselves the chance. They don't endure the silence long enough. They don't suffer the solitude to the end. They jump ship too early. They crawl back. They apologize for their truth. They break under the pressure of her disapproval. But the man who stays standing, the man who stays silent when her rage demands an explanation, the man who stays calm when she withdraws affection, expecting him to beg, the man who stays rooted when she tests his resolve, not because he's playing games, but because he simply refuses to lie to himself, that man becomes unforgettable, because he has become real. Sartre spoke of authentic existence, a life where a man accepts the weight of his freedom, the burden of his choice, and never pretends to be less than what he is. This is the essence of masculinity, not as performance, but as presence. And that presence, when it is not dependent on outcome, changes everything. She feels it. She may not even like it, because it confronts her with her own freedom, with her own capacity to choose, with the unsettling awareness that this man will not collapse to make her feel more secure, that he will not abandon his direction just to follow her emotions, and that is when her desire returns. Not because he chased, but because she remembers what it feels like to be with a man who doesn't orbit anything. There is no age limit to this. It is not too late. You could be 70 and still remember who you were before you gave yourself away. You could be in your 20s and choose now to never hand over your identity again. It begins not with loud declarations, but with small refusals. The refusal to send that last message begging for clarity. The refusal to break your silence just because the silence feels unbearable. The refusal to pretend you're okay with something that drains you, just to keep the peace. You are not here to be liked. You are not here to be selected. You are here to become, to expand, to exist with such force that even in stillness, the world leans in. That is the legacy of the Sartrean man, the one who refuses to lie to himself just to be accepted by someone else, the one who knows that every time he sacrifices his authenticity for approval, he loses more than a moment. He loses a piece of his soul. And the soul, my friend, is not something you should gamble for love. Not ever. Because here's what they won't tell you. If she truly respects you, if she is truly ready for a man, she will not leave when you reclaim your freedom. She will meet you there, not as a prize for your performance, but as a woman, sovereign in her own being, choosing you not because you need her, but because you don't. And if she cannot, then she was never yours. She was your mirror, a reflection of your own abandonment. So step out of the mirror, shatter it if you must, and walk forward, alone, not in loneliness, but in power. Because only in that silence, that sacred solitude, will you meet the man you were always meant to be. And he is the one she cannot leave. You're beginning to understand. It's not about detachment for the sake of pride. It's not about distance to manipulate. It's about truth, the only thing you were ever meant to serve. And the truth is this: you were never incomplete. That idea, that poisonous myth, was fed to you from the first moment you saw her and thought, she is what I'm missing. But Sartre would tell you, no one completes you. Because to be complete is to stop becoming. And the moment you hand someone that role, you hand them the script of your life and say, rewrite me. You surrender authorship. And a man without authorship is no man at all. You see it in older men, their eyes like old photographs, faded but haunted. They don't talk about it. They speak in half-honest sentences and harmless anecdotes, but you can feel it. They gave up too much. They surrendered their edge. They stopped writing their own pages, and now they live in chapters that no longer sound like their voice. You also see it in the young, the men who say all the right things, who mirror her values, her moods, her politics. But underneath, there's a desperation, an invisible leash they don't even know they wear. She sees it too. She may not say it, but she senses the weakness, not of body, but of will. And it dries her desire like wind over flame. But the rare man, he writes his own book, even if she never reads it, even if no one reads it, even if it means solitude. And here's the sacred secret, one Sartre implied, but left unsaid. When a man is willing to be alone, he becomes irresistible, because aloneness is the birthplace of authenticity, not loneliness, not exile, but chosen solitude, the kind that hammers you into something that no one else could forge, the kind that burns the noise out of you until your silence is its own kind of music, the kind that makes you enough in your own eyes. When that man speaks, he does not speak to impress. When he gives, he does not give to bind. When he stays freely. And when he leaves, he does not look back. And that man, that presence, alters the room, not because of some trick, not because of status, but because he walks with the weight of someone who belongs to himself. She cannot help but feel it. Not every woman will be ready. Most are used to men who fold. Most are calibrated to emotional acrobatics and strategic compliance. They won't understand what it means to be near a man who simply refuses to be less than real. But some women, the right women, will recognize you not with their mind, but with their nervous system. They will feel safe, not because you coddle them, but because they finally sense they are in the presence of someone who won't vanish into their expectations. And that is rare. You have always been told to chase, but the truth is, the more you chase, the more you erase yourself. Let her come to you, not as a reward, but as a test. Can you remain whole, even in the presence of love? Can you hold your course, even when she cries, pleads, tempts, storms? Can you stay in yourself, not out of cruelty, but because you no longer wish to lie? If you can, you will find a freedom that no romance, no validation, no praise can match. You will have yourself, and in that self, you will find more than power. You will find peace. You are not who you were at the beginning of this narration. Something has shifted. Maybe it's quiet, maybe it's roaring, but you feel it. That deep inner silence no longer feels like loneliness. It feels like home. You are no longer reaching, no longer stretching yourself thin to be seen, no longer performing love like it's an audition. Now, you are watching the world revolve, slowly, rhythmically, around a self you no longer compromise. And this is the secret Sartre understood so well, hidden between the pages of being and nothingness, and buried in the marrow of every man who's ever looked in the mirror and asked, "What am I, if not who they want me to be?" You are nothing, and from that nothing, you are everything you choose. No script, no savior, no role. Freedom is terrifying. That's why most men run from it. That's why they escape into women, into work, into wine, into war. Anything to avoid the raw, unbearable truth of their own authorship. But you have chosen otherwise. You have chosen to carry the weight, to be the source, to create meaning rather than borrow it. And this choice, this radical act of being, changes everything. It doesn't mean you don't love. It doesn't mean you don't feel. It means you do not collapse. You can be touched, but not reshaped. You can be moved, but not removed from your center. You can offer love, but only from overflow, never from emptiness. And now she feels it. Whether she is 25 or 62, whether she is radiant or wounded, confident or confused, she feels something ancient rise in your presence, a gravitational pull that does not beg, a sovereignty that does not shift. And maybe she stays, maybe she doesn't. But that's not the story anymore, because you no longer build your story around who stays. You are the story. She can read it or walk away, but you are not rewritten. This is your arrival, not at power, not at dominance, but at the holy stillness of a man who finally remembers what he is. He is not a mirror, he is not a mask, he is not a strategy, a plea, or a softened version of himself waiting for permission. He is, and now the world must decide what to do with that, because you will not beg, you will not kneel, you will not trade your soul for a touch, a text, or a temporary high. You will walk forward without needing a witness. And that is the man they remember. That is the man she dreams about years later when her bed is warm but her spirit is cold. That is the man who no longer has to ask what went wrong, because now he knows. Nothing went wrong. He simply hadn't arrived in himself yet, but now you have. And from this place everything begins, not with a chase, not with a strategy, but with silence. Still, unbreakable, free. This was Sartre's shocking truth. Women fall for rare men who don't need them. If this woke something in you, if it stripped away a lie, if it showed you a version of yourself you haven't met in years, then like, share, subscribe, and support the channel through the link in the description, because this isn't just a narration, it's the beginning of you.